Welcome to 3D Printer Chat. I'm your host, Chris Garrett. And this is an episode with just me this time, and I'm going to talk about the phases of 3D printer ownership. So we talked about buying a 3D printer and what it's like to get a 3D printer and some of the downfalls. But what's the experience of owning a 3D printer like? And I believe we go through various phases, and I've talked to many people and they've agreed with me. And the first is excitement and anticipation. We watch Star Trek and we see people using a replicator, and he says Earl Grey tea hot, and it appears in front of him. And we see science fiction shows, and we see even detective shows, CSI and things, where people are using 3D printers, and we think, great, I want one of those. I can make anything I want. And so we get all excited. We go on Facebook and we anticipate the arrival. We look at all the specs. We order our printer, we anticipate it arriving, and that anticipation turns to frustration when it actually arrives, and instead of getting a perfect 3D model printed and in our hands, we get spaghetti. We get frustration, we get disappointment. In a conversation on Twitter the other day, I was chatting with a few people, and I said it's a disappointment delivery system because in our heads, we believe it's going to be fast, it's going to be a perfect model printed, it's going to look good, it's going to be reliable. But in fact, 3D printing right now is not entirely reliable, and there's a random factor. There are things that happen that are our own fault, and there's things that just happen. One of my prints last week failed 3 times in a row because the spool got tangled, and instead of feeding into the extruder, it tried to pull itself apart because the spool completely jammed. There was a tangle and a knot in the filament, and it just couldn't pull anymore, and it started with a layer shift and ended up with just a tangle and a big knot of filament. So that frustration turns to anger, and people go on Facebook and they say, this brand is terrible, I'm going to throw it out of the window, I'm going to destroy it, I'm going to smash it. And then it turns to denial. It can't be my fault. It can't be anything I've done. It must be the company. The company is bad, and the customer service is just not responsive, and I'm not getting any help, and nobody's helping me. Then it turns to bargaining. Please, community, help me. Please, Facebook community. Please, Reddit. Please, forum people, help me. And then there seems to be a shift where people get a little glimpse that actually things could be okay, and they can start to get some prints adhering to the printer plate and going all the way through and actually not looking terrible. And so maybe this is going to be for me. And then the Thingiverse addiction starts, where people go to Thingiverse and they download lots of toys and novelty items, little props, trivial stuff, but stuff that they can download and print and show off and get a little bit of validation. And that's where a lot of people end. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with downloading from Thingiverse and printing them out. That's great. That's a hobby in itself. But a lot of people move on to the next step of creating their own things. They get bored of printing other people's things, then they have an idea of what they want to make. And so they start designing things, or they might start finishing the objects from Thingiverse. They might download an action figure or a gaming piece and want to paint it, and that's great as well. Maybe even combine the two. Cosplay is a perfect example of seeing something, creating your own replica, and then weathering it and painting it and making it look really good and realistic. So that becomes part of the maker culture, where instead of just printing something, you're actually making something your own. And then there's full-on design, where people go from Tinkercad and software such as that into using things like Fusion 360 and Onshape and SolidWorks, which is the next step from becoming a professional. Now, one of the things I haven't talked about is where people start making money from the hobby. And that is whole subject on its own. But a lot of people go into 3D printing thinking it is a way to make quick money, and it isn't. In fact, a lot of the people who make money with 3D printing, they pretty much cover their own overhead, or they keep the filament coming in, but not much more than that. You do need to be really businesslike to make a profit with 3D printing. And don't be deluded into thinking it's quick and easy money, because it's not. All of those frustrations, the anxiety behind it is increased when you've got a customer who's demanding and wants good results and fast. So make sure your printers are reliable, that give good output, and that you can be running your printers 24/7. There's a lot of printers that don't like to be run that much. They might have some faults, they might overheat, they might burn out. And don't be creating for yourself a minimum wage job instead of a hobby. If you think you're enjoying it, just consider that you might be adding a burden to yourself by trying to make money from it instead of just enjoying it for what it is. That said, a lot of people do love their 3D hubs. They love printing for other people. They like the satisfaction they get from providing prints for other people and helping people out, especially if it's like prosthetics and things that really help people's lives. So you've become semi-pro, professional, or really experienced. I guess the next step, and the final step for a lot of people, is exhibiting at things like Comic-Con or Maker Faire, and that's when it spreads virally. Your joy and excitement and enthusiasm is spread to other people who then start the process all over again. They get excited about it and want a 3D printer of their own. If you do want to bring people into 3D printing, one of the best ways is to join your local Makerspace. If you've never seen a Makerspace before, it's like a gym, but for nerds. Instead of gym equipment, it's tools. Things like drills and saws, laser cutters, 3D printers, and CAD computers, CNC machines. So consider joining your local Makerspace. Some libraries have them, some schools have them, some universities have them, and see if you can spread your experience that way. If you can't do it that way, answer some questions in the forums on Facebook. Remember how it was when you started, how you didn't know everything and you had to learn from other people. So in the next episode, we'll be getting together as a group again, and we'll be talking about 3D printer filament, which is the best to use for what application, what are the upsides and the downsides. So please like us, review us, share with your friends, subscribe, and listen next time. Thank you.